Hi Lumineers, welcome to the Lighter Side Show. I'm your host, Jamie Butler, the Everyday Medium. And today I have in studio Dan Drasin. He's a documentarian filmmaker, and we are going to talk about analyzing orbs. I'm sure a few of you Lumineers have taken some photographs and found some orbs in the pictures. Well, today I'm going to be talking with Dan about what are those orbs? Are they phenomena or not? We're going to analyze all of that for you. All right, Lumineers, let's get into this. Are you excited? I am. I did spend some time watching YouTube videos about orbs and what people were claiming were spirit and why they were there. And I confess, I was a little giggly about it and disappointed. It was just not. So I've got many questions to ask Dan Drasin, who's right here. You're here in Atlanta.
It's been wonderful. I've really enjoyed being here.
Last time, you're welcome. Last time we were together, we were out in San Fran, which is where you are.
Right.
And gosh, we talked a lot about EVPs, paranormal phenomena.
And EVPs are the electronic voice phenomena.
Yes. But today I want to talk about orbs.
Let's talk about orbs.
So for Lumineers, if you have not been introduced to Dan, this has been a huge part of your life. You are a documentarian and filmmaker, and you have kind of I don't want to even say kind of. You have a scientific approach to how you view paranormal. I'd like to hear more about how you developed that, where you gathered that information, and kind of what are your markers for paranormal, and what are your markers for writing it off?
Okay.
Is that vague enough for you? Take it away.
All right. Well, in general, my approach to the paranormal has been, I wouldn't say I fall into the skeptic, sort of occult skeptic category at all. But I believe in basically the scientific method. You ask the right questions, you collect the right evidence, and you do the best you can to figure things out. And bring whatever resources to bear that you need to bring, your own expertise, the expertise of others, and you sift it and sort it and see what makes sense. Now, I've been kind of down the paranormal rabbit hole much of my life as sort of a parallel to my professional life as a filmmaker and media producer. And so in recent years, I've sort of brought the two together. I've made a number of films in this area that hopefully begin to shine the light of science into these areas.
Yes, they do.
I think there's a lot of misconception about science in our culture. There's an assumption that science equals materialism. And that's beginning to break down now, and we're realizing that science is a method of inquiry. That's really all it is. It's an approach to inquiry.
Okay.
Materialism is a philosophy or an assumption or almost a religion that says matter is all there is. Okay. It's basically an assumption, and much of what contemporary science looks at is based on the assumption that all is matter and perhaps energy and perhaps space. But anything beyond that, a priori, does not exist. And so it turns science into a kind of a closed system. But when you get into science simply as a method of inquiry, it becomes an open system. You don't rule things out in advance. I think that's beginning to happen. A number of physicists have awoken to this, partly through the advent of quantum physics, which really pushes the boundaries or pushes beyond the boundaries of the materialist approach to reality. And we know that physical reality interfaces with consciousness in certain ways, and quantum physics has proven this time and time again. This understanding is really in its infancy now, but we're moving in that direction, and I think it's very exciting.
It's super exciting.
Yeah.
What do you mean?
Right. Because we're taking two worlds or two ways of looking at things and experiencing them, and we're bringing them together as a whole. It's beginning to really work and expand our understanding of reality. It does not include intuition and perception and phenomena like mediumship and psychic phenomena, because these can now be brought under a single umbrella, and there's no conflict among them. We're putting together a larger picture of things, very much like before the Renaissance, we believed that the sun revolved around the earth and the stars revolved around the earth, right? And what could be more obvious? Of course the sun goes around the earth. And most cultures, most of our early cultures, including the Western culture, the European culture, believed that. And then along came Mr. Copernicus and Mr. Galileo, and they said, oh, wait a minute. If you put the sun at the center, all kinds of things fall into place that were mysteries before. Bang. And all this took was a very simple shift of perspective. And that is what is beginning to happen now around the areas that we consider paranormal. And it's funny, paranormal is really a social label rather than a scientific one. Because we don't know what's paranormal because we can't talk about it. How do we know that our next door neighbor isn't talking to their dead uncle twice a week? How can we possibly know? Because it's a social taboo.
It is.
So I think one of the outcomes of this shift and of a greater both academic and public acceptance of a larger view of things is that people will begin to share their stories.
So we can normalize this type of experience.
Exactly. And find out how paranormal it is. I'm not saying everyone has these experiences, but when you start asking people privately, you find that many people have had things that don't fit into the socially acceptable framework.
Oh, I think now it's over 70%, close to 80% of people in the United States believe in ghosts or some kind of paranormal activity. It might not be part of their belief system as a whole, but they believe it's real.
Right. Well, that's a start. Some people will believe just to believe, and this is what the scientific approach tends to filter out. And I think it's okay to believe whatever you want to believe. I'm not putting it down. I think it's a good idea not to mix the two. To say that well, again, belief is a kind of a broad concept.
Yeah.
People can have experiences they can't talk about, but they can say, I believe it. And that's kind of neutral. Okay, you're welcome to believe whatever you want to believe. But often these beliefs are based on actual experiences that can't be revealed. We know that there are penalties in our culture for revealing these things.
Yeah, we can track that in history quite clear.
Right.
And still today, with shaming, that's huge. Guilt, culturally, it's just not embraced.
And people who've had psychic experiences or particularly near-death experiences, they have suffered the worst, really. They've been ostracized by their families. They've been condemned by their clergy. They've been locked up by their psychiatrists.
Medicated heavily.
Medicated heavily. It goes on and on and on. And once we start accepting these things as, even as not normal, but as
you just stop there, just accepted. Yeah. That would be my slice of heaven.
And that's where people can start asking questions instead of condemning folks.
Do you think things like recording orbs, because that's our topic today, so I'm going to kind of hone in on it. Do you think something of that nature can help kind of the movement of acceptance of paranormal or bring it more to the mainstream?
It can if it's done carefully.
Okay, what do you mean?
Because there are a lot of claims about orbs that don't really stand up when you look at them closely. Before the advent of compact digital cameras, orbs were practically unheard of. And so people made a couple of assumptions when they started getting these images. One was that they were images of spirits. Well, maybe they're images of spirits, maybe they're images caused by spirits, and maybe there's something else entirely. A lot of things out there that we don't even have language or concepts for. But, well, go ahead.
I was going to say, I remember the first time I heard about orbs, I was in my early 20s, and somebody showed me a picture, and it was this tiny little bubble. They're like, look, that is the spirit of my, whatever. It was like in front of somebody, and it was on their birthday, and like they had a lot of significant emotional attachment of why this orb is going to be that spirit. And my first thought was, Really, I've never seen spirit get that small. Like, I didn't know that they could shrink like that. Like, it was confusing. And I still teeter with, can they get that small? To me, I feel it's like what you just said. Is it something that they produce, or is it like a flare, like a sun flare? And they have this experience that's away from them, or they shower their energy, or if it's their, for lack of a better word, their emotional love or presence, which causes this, paranormal phenomena to be recorded, but it's not actual their spirit body. There's my 2 cents.
Well, there are a lot of questions there. I'll cut to the chase here. About 90% at least of what appear to be orbs are artifacts of the photographic process. What it comes down to is that small digital cameras, particularly cell phone cameras, act as highly illuminated microscopes for a zone maybe that far in front of the camera. If the slightest dust particle or raindrop or moisture drop in the air falls into that distance in front of the camera.
Even if they're, obviously photographing something this far away, but if it lands here, it shows up?
Yes, it will show up. It will tend not to show up in professional cameras, but it will show up in highly compact digital cameras. And that's partly because the flash unit and the lens are maybe an inch apart at most, and on cell phones they're maybe 1/4 of an inch apart. So the flash is illuminating this area right in front of the lens, probably 10,000 times brighter than the scene that it's set to photograph. So you have huge illumination in this zone, plus the fact that small cameras with small lenses tend to have extreme depth of field. In other words, things are in focus from very close to the lens almost to infinity. And there's a particular zone where the dust particle, or whatever it is, will be just enough out of focus to produce that fuzzy little circle or disc. It usually has a kind of a jagged edge around it, and it's called a diffraction pattern. And that's what usually passes for orbs. Sometimes you'll get insects flying in front of the camera just as the flash goes off. And it's another thing. You'll almost never see orbs in non-flash photos.
Well, what about night vision cameras?
What about them?
Well, I've had several Lumineers send me pictures of their security cameras, their nighttime cameras. So there's no flash per se, but there is an
infrared source of illumination that's also usually very close to the lens. So you really have to look at these pictures individually. You have to study the back. You have to know the background of them, when and where they were taken, what the equipment is, what the environmental conditions were. And then you can usually put together a good picture of how this happened.
So you would say 90% of orb photographs are artifacts?
Artifacts, yes. Okay. And it's useful to know, because then you can begin to look at the remainder 10%. And kind of whittle it. Remember, 10% roughly. Begin to whittle that down, and sometimes other explanations come up. And when you run out of explanations, what's left is something that can't be explained. Okay. And whether it's an image of a spirit, which I personally doubt, or something created by a spirit or a consciousness, I think is, again, a matter of looking at the picture individually, asking about the circumstances, who was present, right? I've had, in my own digital cameras, anomalous orbs, paranormal orbs, show up only when I'm photographing certain kinds of people. So go figure. So that's a very personal thing. And when you're dealing with the paranormal, you're always dealing with layers of consciousness, including the consciousness of the people present. So it can be a very complex thing to really look carefully at. So I don't want to prescribe any one formula for this, but except to say very generally, most of what we take to be orbs are dust particles in the air, moisture droplets, small insects. If you see a streak in the photo, very often it's simply that the shutter was open long enough to capture an insect moving in a brightly lit area of the frame for that period of time. There are other streaks that are very hard to explain and are probably entirely paranormal.
Do you think or believe that if people had focused intent, like a prayer group or a seance, or just laying down an intent or creating a focus spaced of bringing in spirit, that there would be more orb paranormal activity?
I think there might be more paranormal activity in general, depending on the focus.
Because that would play a part in the conscious energy shifting that you're doing to call that in.
You also have to understand that these things do happen. In the realm of consciousness, knowing what's possible makes it more possible. So this is one of the reasons why I've made the films I've made, which provide physical evidence of paranormal phenomena.
Lumineers, and we've spoken with Dan before in the Lighter Side show. His documentary, Calling Earth, and the Skull Experiment, which we showed here at the Center for Love and Light, a month and a half ago, is phenomenal. If you want to take what Dan is saying out loud right now and you want to see it in action, go watch them. You can find him on his website, newscience2020.com, and we'll put that link below. You'll have everything up there, right? People can navigate and find.
Yeah.
Okay. Yes, which is why you made these, which we appreciate, because now people like myself, we don't feel so crazy. Do you mind if I ask you more questions?
Go right ahead.
Okay. I've been told by a lot of people, Lumineers, throughout the years, here is what a spirit orb looks like. Right. And there was like this criteria that was laid out. And if your orb fit in that criteria, then you obviously captured spirit. It was like that cut and dry. I know you don't roll like that, as we've just heard, which I really align with how you're looking at it. If the orb has a ring around it, like a clear straight line, it's not jagged or loose or fuzzy, then it's a spirit.
I don't know. I'll tell you an interesting story.
Yes.
Some years ago, I was visiting some friends in Seattle, a couple with a child, old friends, and I was describing some of the work I was doing, and I happened to mention orbs. And at that time, I was receiving a number of paranormal orbs on my camera. So I'm just out of the blue, I said, I'm going to take a picture of your son and I'll bet that an orb shows up. So I did, and an orb did show up. Now, I can't prove it was paranormal, but I think that's an interesting data point. The next thing that happened is that the husband of this couple, he's a renovation contractor, and he has a little digital camera that he uses to document the homes and so on. He had never gotten any orbs. After my visit, he started to see orbs in his photos, and he sent me a few. Now, I can't tell you whether this is coincidence or not, but it's interesting.
Yeah, but you would think.
He then
go ahead.
Photographed a large children's choir at a local church. And those photos were full of the most incredibly huge, perfect, round orbs I have ever seen. Now, again, I cannot tell you that they were paranormal, but the coincidence was a bit much. So I'm trying not to be dogmatic about this, but from the point of view of a professional photographer, I can see how very many of these things come about, and they are artifacts of the photographic process and of illumination and of the difference between old-fashioned professional cameras and modern digital cameras. Some people felt, because it's digital, it's picking up these things. I don't think so. So it's a kind of a complex issue, but basically, modern digital cameras are highly susceptible to picking up, especially in flash exposures, these very tiny particles in the air, and they're around us all the time.
Right. Yes.
Right? We don't notice them until sometimes we see it under a bright desk lamp,
Yeah.
sunlight, or under a desk lamp, little bits of dust floating around. Otherwise, we're unaware of them.
I was going to say, you mentioned the friend had construction and you would take pictures.
Yeah.
Like, that is a lot of dust kicking up. It's a lot of, and for him not to have seen an orb until it was brought to his conscious attention by you, and then it, like...
But he wasn't photographing during dusty times.
Oh, he wasn't.
He was using them to document the existing condition in an old house before any construction took place. Mm-hmm. So, and these are places where the air has been still for a while. That's all I can say about that. You have to be present under the actual conditions and refer to a particular photograph when you're analyzing these things. It's hard to generalize, except about why these cameras do pick up dust in that little zone. So again, I don't mean to be presenting a cut and dried formula.
No,
I'm saying that you have to understand why these things happen, and then you can go from there.
Okay, so a few other things was that if the orb had color in it, if it had blue and pink or like this rainbow hue, then it was a spirit.
Well, maybe it was a spirit.
Have you heard of these
also
things
could have
before?
been. It also when you have rainbow hued orbs, very often they're what are called lens flares. So just as you can, when a photo is when you see orbs in a flash photo, you have to be suspicious that this characteristic of digital cameras was responsible for it. It almost always happens in flash photos. When you see a colored orb, it's almost always a lens flare. Mm-hmm. And lens flares are very complex internal reflections that occur inside the lenses of cameras. Camera lenses are not just one piece of glass. They're layers of lenses. And light bounces around inside those layers from the surfaces and so on, gets reflected and refracted. And when the primary light source in a photo is either in the picture or just outside the picture, for example, the sun, mm-hmm. you'll almost always get some kind of lens flare. You'll get streaks, you'll get bright orbs. Very often they're oval. And the oval is kind of like this. Mm-hmm. The short axis will always point towards the light source. And that's one way in which you can tell. There are exceptions. Almost always, that's how it goes. And it depends on the angle of the sun, the type of lens, where the lens is focused. It's very complex. But usually you'll see rainbow colors, and usually you'll see the primary light source either in the photo or just off the edge, outside.
Okay, I've got one more. Sure. Some luminaires say that when you can see the face inside of the orb, eyes, nose, when there's some distinction, then that's obviously a spirit. That may be so. It may be so in many cases. It's also easy to see faces in random patterns. And when people start seeing the face of Jesus or Mary or some religious figure... Are you about to balk on my toast? Actually, I have a Mother Mary image in the tile in my bathroom, in my shower. So whenever I'm washing my hair and I look over, there she is looking
Mother
at
Mary
me.
comes to me.
I'll show it to you when we come back. Okay.
Yeah.
So yes.
So yeah, it's easy. It's easy to project faces. I'm not saying they're not there. I'm saying we need to be cautious. Faces is the easiest thing for us to visualize in random patterns for obvious reasons. And sometimes people project significance into these things that may or may not be there. I've also seen paranormal faces in images that are of deceased folks. Yes. Right. And some of these are in my film. You'll see them. And you can also see them online. There's a young Dutch guy, Robert Vandenbroek, he's a whole interesting long story in himself. But he's been producing faces of the deceased both on film and digital cameras for years. And you can go online and see these. And we don't know how he does it. He claims he's not responsible for it. He claims there's a force or a presence or something that's working through him. And I visited him in 2014, I think it was. And I set up some tests. I brought my own camera, my own memory cards, high security. I had a camera watching the scene from a second angle, and he produced some really remarkable images on my camera. He's done this with journalists' cameras and friends' cameras and visitors' cameras. And I think it's intriguing, fascinating, and highly evidential.
It's incredible.
And there are two types of photographs that he'll produce of folks on the other side. One type is they're somewhat distorted. They look like sort of direct mental projections from the other side. They're not photographically accurate, which makes them highly evidential, actually. There's another class of these photos that are based on photos that exist somewhere in the world. So they're almost copies of an actual photo of the person, but there'll be very interesting distortions and variations. That's in my film. You'll see that as well. So how these things take place, it's beyond our concepts, but they do take place, and there's plenty of hard proof of them.
Well, what would you recommend to people watching if they wanted to kind of get into this? Are there some set boundaries or maybe a camera that you could recommend, or a certain type of prep to see if they could photograph any paranormal activity?
I don't know that there's any prescription for it. I don't know that there's any particular equipment. As with the electronic voice phenomena, where people hear the voices of deceased friends and relatives through tape recorders and telephones and a variety of equipment, TV sets and so on. Your relationship with the person on the other side is the most important thing. They themselves may or may not be interested in showing up.
That's true.
They're human as well, right?
We can't force them to perform.
Right. They need to meet us halfway, and there's a kind of an agreement that I'm sure takes place when these kinds of things happen. And although these phenomena occur through technical means, the means seem to be less important than the intention and the relationship.
That's it.
This is certainly true of electronic voice phenomena, which can happen through simple tape recorders, and digital memo recorders, and cell phone recorders, and that sort of thing. We don't know what conditions enhance or inhibit this kind of thing. Some people say it works better during the waxing phase of the moon. That's something that could easily be researched, whether it tends to, that span of time tends to enhance it for whatever reason. But we need to listen to people who are reporting these things, not dismiss it, and look at it statistically. If we can't understand the mechanisms behind it, at least we can understand things like time cycles, when these things might be happening more frequently. There are well-worn statistical approaches to these things that are used in all the other sciences that can just be brought to bear. Nothing special. And the more we start thinking of these as nothing special, the easier it will be to learn more about them, distinguish the false positives from the genuine article. And I have a feeling that the more at ease we are with these things, not only will we know more about them, but I think they'll probably tend to occur more frequently.
I hope they do.
And that's partly has to do with the collective consciousness in our realm, that when it tries to screen things out, it just makes it more difficult. When we're more accepting, these things will happen more frequently.
Lumineers, if you want to see more of Dan, please check out his documentaries Calling Earth and The Skull Experiment. Find him on his website at newscience2020.com. And he's also the producer at New Dimensions Radio, which you can head to their website, newdimensions.org, and you can listen to all their podcasts and radio shows right there on the website. Dan is a big motivator behind getting information and education out there, and we really appreciate it. Like, deeply. Thank you.
The appreciation is mutual.
Oh, Lumineers, to you, thank you so much for being here, for lending us your eyes and your ears. I hope you have an incredible rest of your day, and remember, it's not woo-woo, it's true. Bye, Lumi.